my name is Chloe and I am 42 years old and I currently live in Tasmania. I live in a little sort of rustic tiny shack up in the bush and I live here with my husband. And I have been living pretty much a traveling lifestyle since about 2008 when I finally took the plunge to get out and quit my job and sell my house and take the dog in the car. And we started by traveling around Australia.
So 2008, you made some big changes. What was leading up to you making those changes? What was going on?
Once I'd left school at the age of 18, I joined the military and I was in the Navy and I bought a house and I'd set myself up and then I'd got out of the military and in 2006 I had this job where I was doing health and safety and I was living in Perth in Western Australia at the time and I'd flown up to a little town called Port Hedland. It's a mining town and they gave me a hire car for the day to get to and from the job. And they said, with the hire car, you can pretty much do whatever you want. And I thought, oh, what am I going to do? I'm in the middle of the nowhere and I'm by myself. And I just picked up a map and I thought, oh, I'm going to drive to this place. And the place I chose was a place called Point Sampson. It's just a little coastal town. And I took a trip in the car and drove down the highway and went and had lunch by myself and walked on this beach. And when I was driving back, I noticed that the fuel light was on and I was about to run out of fuel. And I thought, oh, this is crazy. I'm in the middle of nowhere. What am I going to do? And I remembered seeing this pub. So I was hoping and praying I could get to this pub. And I pulled into this pub. If anyone knows it, it's the Whim Creek Hotel. It's just in the middle of a highway. There's nothing out there. And I went in, I told them my predicament, and they said that they didn't have petrol at this pub. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And a guy sitting at the bar heard me and he came over. He goes, look, I heard that you need a little help. I've got some petrol in a jerry can. If you give me $20, I'll fill up your car and it'll get you back to Port Hedland. And I was so grateful. We filled up the car. I started driving back and I don't know, I felt different. I felt this sense of adrenaline. I felt thrilled. I just felt like I'd never felt before after working for 5 or 6 years by now. And when I got back to this hotel room, I was sitting in there and I think to myself, there's got to be more to life than just working to pay for this mortgage and getting married and settling down. And the next day I was just on this high from this feeling that I'd had and these thoughts that I'd had the night before. And I went walking around Port Hedland and I went into a newsagent. I found this magazine. It was and it had a little list in it that said 100 things to see and do Australia before you die. And I said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to do that. It did take me a year and a half to get there, but I eventually sold my house on impulse after a New Year's Eve spent alone at home with the dog. And I found that magazine and I said, now's the time. And a week later, I put my house on the market. It sold within the week. I had a shipping container on my front lawn and I packed everything I owned in it. And then I took the dog and my little car and we started driving around Australia.
That year and a half and actually making that decision, had you just come to like the end of your rope or because actually it's the follow through that I'm interested in. Was it just that New Year's Eve sort of being by yourself at home? Was that when things like really just like came to a head for you and it was just like, no, this is now or never to because these are big decisions, selling your house, packing up all your belongings, and taking a year off.
It was really just that New Year's Eve when I was sitting there sort of having a phone call with my ex at the time and we were on and off and I was in the middle of an apprenticeship and I just thought like, is this what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? And a few years before, I'd actually encouraged a friend of mine who wanted to leave to sell her house and go. And I actually rang her that night and she said, what did you tell me to do? And I said, just do it. And she said, then just do it. And that was back then I wasn't really in tune with myself and things that I'd learnt along the way. But that was the first moment where the universe sort of conspires to make these things happen. And I just had this seed and I put the house on the market. And the fact that it sold within the week and the container came and my things left and everything just happened so quickly, it was time. Like I knew that it was the right path, and I didn't really look back from there.
Yeah. How was your lap around Australia? What were some of the highlights? What were some of the challenges? What were some of those, yeah, those like magical moments? Because I mean, Australia is such a vast country, and I know from personal experience, because my brother lives in Melbourne, that generally it is people sort of end up going to like Perth, Melbourne, Sydney, up the East Coast, maybe like Darwin or Uluru, but there's a lot of sand and there's a lot of nothingness, but there's also a lot of beauty in the country. Tell us about, yeah, driving around and the highlights.
Well, it started off with some work because when I sold the house, I wanted to start off like all these other people start off with nothing. So I put the money away and I left with $500. And so the first thing I did was work. And when I'd started working, I realized that I'm going to need longer than a year straight away. So then I went up the West Coast, but then I came back down of Western Australia, and I really actually just drove a lap. Like you said, Australia is so vast. I spent most of that trip just driving around. I tried to tick some things off my list, but mostly it was just spent driving around. And it was so tricky because I look back now and I laugh. I'd bought the tent, I'd bought everything to be self-sufficient, but then I was petrified to stay in a tent. I thought, I can't stay in a tent. So the first 2 weeks I was staying in caravan parks in cabins, and I was staying in hotels, and I was running out of money very, very quickly, until I was in a place in the Northern Territory and I met this young girl, and she was younger than me, all of about 19, and she was living in like staying in her tent. And I thought, well, if this girl can do it, then I can do it. And I asked her a lot of questions. And then the next night I went to a free camp and I pitched my tent at a place called Mataranka, and there's some hot springs there. And I slept in my tent for the first time, and that was it. After that, the dog and I, we stayed in the tent for the rest of the trip until we got to basically back to the start again, almost near Port Hedland. I started working in a roadhouse there, and by then I'd almost been going for about 8 months. And like I said, I literally just drove around Australia. We didn't do much. And when I was working in that roadhouse, I met a boy, and which wasn't part of the plan, and we sort of hit it off and fell in love, and that was, Willie, and we then that left that roadhouse, and we drove down the west coast of Australia. Then we drove through the central part of Australia, in through to Uluru, and through the central part of South Australia, through the central part of New South Wales, and then we ended up moving to New Zealand because that's where he was from. And I lived in New Zealand with him from 2009 until 2010, where we basically worked and saved to then go and backpack around Europe for 3 months. And yeah, and so then we went over to Europe and I backpacked around Europe for 3 months. And when I had planned that trip, I had planned the whole 3 months off a spreadsheet. Every single day was booked. I had a very tight schedule. And when I was leaving Europe, I felt like I didn't have this light bulb moment that everybody gets when they're traveling, and about life really. And I was like, oh, I never got that. And I left Europe and flew back via Singapore. And when I was in Singapore, I was pretty disheartened that I didn't have this experience. And Will had stayed in Europe, and I was just like, I need to do something spontaneous. And at the time, I rang my mum and I just told her, like, this is how I was feeling. And she goes, then stay there. So I had a couple of $1,000 left over, and then I just got a Lonely Planet guidebook in Singapore, and then I backpacked my way around mostly Cambodia just for 3 weeks. But it was exhilarating for me because I didn't have a plan. I got off this airport in Cambodia and I didn't know what to do except that I had to get my photo taken for a visa. And these two Dutch girls came up to me and they said, do you know where you're staying? And I said, no idea. And they said, oh, come with us. we're staying at a guest house, but we're looking for someone. We want to go to some temples and we're looking for someone to share the cost with. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. So I went to this hostel with them and I traveled around with them to do these temples that they wanted to do. And then I ended up going out to Angkor Wat. And then I spent a little bit of time in Phnom Penh at the end. And while walking around, I saw a flyer about some yoga and some meditation. I thought, oh, I've always really wanted to try these things. And I went in and I really just connected with it. And I thought, this is really great. Like for mental health as well, because I was always struggling with a lot of things in life at the time. And I think as we all do really. And the meditation, I was like, this is going to be a great way to help me deal with things in my mind. And I came back to Australia, and the place that I had been to the yoga and meditation in Cambodia actually had a retreat near where I was based at the time. And so I ended up going up there for a couple of weeks and doing like a deep dive into their meditation. And then from there, I set off with the dog and the car to start working in farming around Australia. When I had met Willie, he used to drive a header, which is a combine, driving like they harvest the grain, like the big cropping, like big grain harvest. I don't know how to explain it, but and so I was like, I want to drive these tractors. So I started working. I'd changed now from hospitality to working, driving tractors, headers, chaser bins. I worked in the shearing sheds and all. I sort of was traveling around in my car with the dog while exploring Australia, just working on and off, camping, living in the tents. In 2012, we took a trip, the dog and I took a trip to Lake Eyre in South Australia. We drove through the middle of South Australia and flew over Lake Eyre when it was in full flood. And it was really beautiful. And yeah, and then 2013 came, and that was the year of my 30th birthday. And I thought, well, I'm going to do something really big. And I decided to go to South America to see Machu Picchu. And I when I went to South America, I decided to learn from those lessons when I had gone to Europe, and I planned point A and point B. So I booked a flight in and I booked a flight out, and I didn't book any hostels. So when I got off the plane in Santiago, Chile, I got a bus into the city, and then I was walking around with the Lonely Planet guide trying to find a hostel. And I did that for 2 months in South America, and it was just the time of my life without having any plan, and just knowing that I had to get to this point B was all I really needed. And then from there, I went to the USA and I spent my 30th birthday in Las Vegas, which was a dream I'd set a couple of years before. And then I came back to Australia and I had a farming job again. And I was only back for a couple of weeks when I got a phone call, and I found out that Willie was killed um, by a drunk driver driving his truck in Western Australia, and it stopped everything. Everything just stood still, and I didn't really know how to cope. I was at that time, at the moment when that happened, and the months that followed, everything was a whirlwind. I went to New Zealand, we went to the funeral, all of that was done. I came back, I was like, I don't want to live where I'm living. I don't want to work where I'm working. I I was in a lot of pain. I didn't really have a very good support network. Um, After a couple of months, I was like, why are you still upset about this? Like, you need to get over this. And uh, I I thought, okay, there's something wrong with me. So I just wanted to forget everything that had happened in my life and everything that was happening at the time. And I thought, okay, the best way to do this is to change your life. And so I got rid of my phone, got off my social medias, moved to a town where nobody knew who I was, nobody knew who Willie was, and I thought, right, I can just forget about this now. And that doesn't work. You can't forget. That you can move to wherever you want to go, but you can't forget these things. It's going to be inside of you. And that's when I learned that I need to deal with this, and this is grief. And so I went back to my foundation and I went back to the meditation place and I went to a workshop there, and that was really helpful. And interestingly, I'd sat next to a woman who didn't know anything about me, and she just said, "Oh, I think you should walk a Camino." I said, "Well, what's a Camino?" And she goes, "Oh, it's this walk in Spain and it's really lovely and you just take everything you need on your back and you just walk across." And I was like, "What this sounds crazy. Like, what do you mean?" And she goes, "I think that you would really benefit from it. Just look it up." So I left the retreat and I went back to where I was working, and that wasn't really working out. And so I bought a guidebook for the French Camino on my Kindle, and I started reading it. I thought, I'm going to do this. So I rang a friend and asked them if they could look after Dexter, and they said yes. And I bought a new pair of trainers and a plane ticket. And 3 weeks later, I flew out to Saint Jean Pied de Port. So this was at the start of 2014 in April. I had no idea what I was doing. I just had this guidebook and I had way too much stuff in my backpack, as everybody says on their first adventure. But I was one of those people. I thought I needed to carry 5 pairs of undies, 5 pairs of socks, 5 t-shirts, 5 pairs of shorts. I thought I had to have all of these things. And I started walking and I learned a lot on the way. Um, I learnt that what I was feeling was grief, because if anyone's walked a Camino, you know that everybody talks. It took me a while to open, and in all honesty, I wasn't very open on the French Camino. It wasn't until I walked the Norte that I was better at talking to people. But I definitely learnt what I was going through and what I was experiencing was completely normal. And so during that time on the French Camino, I realized that I'd learnt a lot from Willie's death, and it sort of began to really shape my life. And I made a promise to him when I was out there that I wouldn't worry about money anymore and I wouldn't worry about stuff, because none of those things matter. And I would just do what I wanted to do with my life. No excuses really. And then on that French Camino, I just learned so much about myself, and I fell in love with this minimalistic, simple way of life. And I realized that like walking with everything on my back just really agreed with me. And I felt like I'd found my passion and my purpose, and that this was exactly what I came to this earth to do, was to have these adventures and to live this simple life. And I was introduced to Thoreau's Walden on that walk, and then I eventually read that book, and that led to where I am today, really my very own version of Walden, which we can get to. But after I walked that French Camino, I thought, right, I need to be able to create this life that I've had on this trail, off trail. How am I going to do that? Well, I came back to Australia and I did my usual working and traveling in the car bit, saving money. And in 2016, we really started getting into it. So from there, I walked the Camino Norte and the Primitivo, which was 1,100 kilometers. And then in 2017, I took a backpack to Uruguay. And for 6 weeks, I just hitchhiked along the coastline, walking along the beaches. I camped out in the mountains all by myself with just the guidebook. And it was another one of those just amazing adventures. I remember this one night I'd hitched up into these mountains where there was a waterfall, and some people said you could camp out there. And I walked out and I pitched my tent in this field, but there was nobody else out there. I don't even know where the nearest human was. And in the middle of the night, I could hear this noise, and I got up and there was all these horses around my tent. And it was so beautiful. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. Like, I'm really, really living my life. And I always felt kind of safe, because I've always felt that in a way I've had somebody protecting me, I suppose. So being out there and alone, I've never really felt alone. I always felt like there's something with me. So I've always felt safe doing these things. And then in 2018, that was 2018 was 10 years since Dexter and I, my dog, left to drive around Australia. So I decided not to go overseas and I decided to take a 10,000-kilometer road trip with the dog. We bought this little camper. It's like they call it a J pod, and I towed it behind my car. So it was essentially a little tiny house towed behind my car with a bed and a little kitchen, and we drove around the outback Queensland for about 4 or 5 months. And then that year, I decided that I've got to start getting the Dexter was getting older and I need to start getting rid of my stuff. So I still had that shipping container stored on a property, and I was like, I need to get rid of that stuff. So I got that shipping container shipped from Western Australia to a property in Victoria, and I just gave it all away. And now everything I owned was just inside my car and this little tiny pod. And I felt so much lighter now that I didn't have all of these possessions. And in 2019, it was time for Dexter to pass away. She was getting old, she was getting sick. And I knew I was going to struggle with losing her because she was my best friend. We took off on this adventure together, and with the exception of my little 3-month trips overseas, I'd spent every day with her. She came to my work. She would sit in the shearing sheds with me. She would sit in the tractors with me. She'd be out on the farm with me. And yeah, I knew what the grief was going to be like. And so this time sounds a bit crazy, but I wanted to prepare myself for it. So I took a quick trip to Bali to do a yoga immersion and some meditation, and I went to a silent retreat. And it was there that I discovered a place called Serenity in Canggu, which now is my second home and is my recovery from my adventures now. And I set a plan on paper of what I was going to do once Dexter passed away and how I was going to cope with it. And I really cemented in my 5-year walk around the world plan. I said, once she goes, I'm free. I'll take the money from the house and I'm going to walk around the world. Dexter passed away and it was tough, but it was also something that I knew was going to happen. So it was a lot easier than when Will was killed because I was prepared for this. I took a road trip with a friend and we went to these national parks in Australia, like some national parks in Australia. And because you can't go there with dogs, I've never been to any of the national parks. And it was during this road trip that I was like, wow, I have no more responsibility. And now I have absolute ultimate freedom. I can go wherever I want, when I want. And I was just like, wow, I cannot wait to walk around the world. And I want to just create this life that I dream of, like forever, essentially. And so 2020 came around and I was working in Tasmania. And I think we all know what 2020 brought, COVID. I had a flight booked for Spain and that flight got cancelled.
How was your COVID years?
Difficult, extremely difficult. I understand that a lot of people thrived in COVID. As somebody who had just found ultimate freedom and really already lived quite a like transient lifestyle, it was so hard. At first, it was just like losing somebody you love. It hit me there. And it really hit me because I was living in my van working on a farm in Tasmania, and I got pulled over by the police. And I was subjected to an hour with this police officer telling me that I couldn't be here, that I needed to go home. And I was trying to explain to him that I don't have a home. I live in my van. And at that time, my driver's license was for like a post office in rural Victoria. It wasn't actually even a house. And I was like, I can't leave. I've got a job and I live in my van. And he goes, this is a pandemic. You need to go home. And I was so upset. It took me a couple of weeks. I was just distraught. I thought, what am I going to do? And I was like, I need to buy my own block of land where I can park my van and I can have my own space and where I'm safe. And so I thought, well, now's the time to birth this Walden idea. And I found this bush block in a little town, and I bought the block of land. And if you saw it, you would think, what is this girl thinking? At the time when I purchased this block of land, you couldn't even drive onto it. It didn't have access. It was bush and gorse and blackberry. And I walked up the side fence and looked at it and said, wow, I've got a vision for this thing. And so from 2020 until 2022, with the help of some people and friends and things like that, I sort of created this world, and I chipped away at blackberries. I had somebody make a path so I could park the van up there. I ended up buying myself a 1976 Volkswagen Combi, Smurf Blue. I called it Sassette. It was a dream I'd always had to buy a combi van, but something I would never commit to because all my money was going into adventures. And I thought, well, if I can't travel, what would I like to do next? I'm going to buy a combi. So I bought this combi and I sort of lived and slept in the combi while I was up here at Walden. And eventually we built this little tiny shack that I'm sitting in right now and talking to you, Sarah, and looking out at my garden. There's lavender now, sage, rosemary, lilium, fennel. Just, it's a wild garden just of food. And just from throwing seeds out and putting things in the ground, we've just created this beautiful place here. And yeah, I tried to stick really with the principles of Thoreau, with self-reliance and simplicity. So it's very basic. We don't have a shower here. We just cook on a fire. I have a fire inside. We have water that we catch from the roof, but it's a very, very simple existence. And we've got some solar as well now. So yes, we live in a pretty simple shack. And then the end of 22 came about and the world was starting to open up again. But by now I had given up on the 5-year walking around the world trip because I had no money. So I had to start working again. So I sold the combi van. I bought another van that I could live in, and I left my little shack and drove away to a farm to go back to work. I needed to get money now so I could travel in 2023, which was going to be my 40th birthday now. And just before I left, I met another Will. I never thought I would meet another Will, but I met another Will. And I told him who I was and what my way of life was, and that I wasn't going to change. And I'm going in this van because I need to get some money, because next year I need to walk 2,000 kilometers. I didn't know where I was going to walk at the time, but I said, I'm walking 2,000 kilometers for my 40th birthday. And he said, that's okay. And I left and we started dating from there. And in 2023, I did set a plan to walk 2,000 kilometers for my 40th birthday, and I opted to walk the Wales Coast Path and the Portuguese Camino. Originally, my plan was to walk the Silver Camino, and just before I was about to fly out, about 3 weeks before flying, they were talking about how hot it was going to be in Spain at that time, and that was going to be June, July, to walk the Silver Camino. It's not really recommended, but I thought I could do it. And I started freaking out, and my gut instinct was like, don't do this. Like, this isn't good. And so I was like, well, what am I going to do? And I was obviously dating Will at the time. I said, what am I going to do? And he said, well, I don't know, like, you'll be fine. And I said, no, I can't do this. My gut feeling is telling me that I can't do this, but I wasn't going to cancel. I was determined to walk these 2,000 Ks. And this is where you came in, Sarah. I'd just flicked on a video and I'd seen your Wales Coast Path. I was like, oh, what's this Wales Coast Path? And I looked at it and I thought, that sounds amazing. And so I bought the guidebook and it got delivered about 3 or 4 days before I left Australia. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, like because I didn't have the guidebook, I didn't know what to do or what to expect. So I started looking online, trying to plan these first few days from leaving Chester. And I thought, this is so expensive. I can't afford to camp in these campgrounds. How am I going to do this? There's no campground the first night. And I started freaking myself out. And I just left and I started the Wales Coast Path on the 1st of June, and it just worked out. Everything worked out. That first day when I left Chester, I thought, I'm going to have to wild camp tonight, and this is scary, but I can do this. And when I got to the first stop, I think it's Flint Castle. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
A yeah, a guy came up to me and he goes, "Are you walking the coast path?" I said, "Yeah, I just started." And he goes, "Oh, I helped create this section of the path." He goes, "Where are you staying tonight?" And I said, "Well, there's no campground, so I'm gonna camp in those bushes over there." And he said, "Oh," he goes, "I wouldn't camp there. It's not really safe. There's some people that live there permanently. I've got a friend, you can stay in his front yard. They always have cyclists in the front yard." And I was like, okay, great. So I went there and I camped. And then the next day I walked out. And from then on, day to day, everything just kept working out. I found the next camp, the next camp, the next camp. I wild camped. If I had to wild camp, I wild camped. But the Wales Coast Path is so well done, you can almost stay in a campground every night, really. And that was challenging. The Wales Coast Path was challenging. If we go back to what was happening in Spain, interestingly, they weren't having a heat wave. Spain was experiencing torrential rain, and that Silver Camino was in flood that year. So I wouldn't have been able to walk it anyway. And Wales was experiencing a heat wave, and I had 21 days of sunshine for my first 21 days on the Wales Coast Path. And then after that, it turned into your typical Welsh weather, and I learnt to deal with walking in the rain, camping in the rain, and all the fun that comes with those sorts of things. But I finished the Wales Coast Path. Will came over and he met me, and he walked I think he walked the last 200 Ks from the Gower, which was quite nice because the last 5 days of the Wales Coast Path into Chepstow isn't really that delightful. It's all that industrial area and things. So it was nice to have him for that. And that was our first time together, sort of sleeping in a tent and doing these sorts of things together. And then we went to Morocco to have a bit of break. And then I started the Portuguese Camino. He walked the first 100 kilometers with me and then left. And I finished the Portuguese Camino and decided to go to Muxia this time because last time I went to Finisterre. And I wanted to always go to Muxia, and I thought if I've walked the entire coast, I'd like to finish at the coast and swim in the ocean. So I walked 2,300 kilometers for my 40th birthday.
What are the plans for your 50th?
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, and then in 2024, I went to Bali for a month back to Serenity to do yoga, and then I decided to do something different this year and do some backpacking. So we backpacked through Vietnam and Laos and Thailand. Once again, we went with the no plan. We didn't even plan to go to Thailand. In fact, we actually had tickets to go to India, but we were trying to apply for our visa while we were in Vietnam, and it was challenging. And I said, I don't want to spend my holiday in Vietnam on the phone trying to get a visa. So we cancelled India and ended up going to Laos and then Thailand. And while we were in Thailand, I saw, Sarah, this is where you come in again. I saw a video of you finishing the Silver Camino, and I was envious. And I said to myself, I need to finish these Caminos off. And so I thought about it for a few days. I didn't say anything to Will, and I was like, no, it was eating me alive. So I took him to the Blue Temple, and I bought him a blue slushie, and I sat him down. I said, we need to talk. He goes, what's going on? I said, I need to thru hike this year. And he goes, that's okay. What do you want to do? I said, by myself, I need to finish these Caminos. I started something in 2014 and it's got me to where I am today. And I need to close this chapter. And he said, if that's what you need to do, then that's what you need to do. How are we going to make this happen? I said, well, we'll go to Bali and we'll do some yoga and then I'll fly over to Spain. And so we got back to the hotel that night and he helped me book a flight. And yeah, we went to Bali together. This was his first time coming to Serenity. So he did the yoga immersion with me. And then we came back to Tasmania and I flew out 2 days later, I think, maybe 3 days, and walked the Via della Plata. It was amazing. Finishing that Camino was incredible. That was 4,500 kilometers of walking those Caminos now all done. And I felt like I'd really closed the chapter and yeah, I was really happy with that. It was beautiful walking in the autumn. I've never experienced autumn like that before. And because all my trips are generally leaving Australia's winter, I'm always in the Northern Hemisphere in like June, July. So I'd never experienced autumn. And it's quieter. That Camino was very quiet. You maybe only had 5 people a day and you walked every day by yourself. It was a really beautiful Camino. It was a nice one to finish on, to be honest. Yeah, so then that was the end of that. So I felt like I finished that chapter, and then we come to 2025 and spontaneously Will and I decided to get married. I just knew that he was the one for me. He was happy to live this lifestyle that I live, living pretty simply, growing our own food and adventuring every year. He was on board with all of this and we were pretty happy. And we decided to get married. Shotgun weddings aren't actually a thing. You can't just get married on the day. You need to apply 4 weeks and 1 day in advance, which is what we found out. So we had to plan that one. And we got married in a really small, barefooted backyard wedding. It was really beautiful. And then we had to plan our trip for 2025. And I sat down how I usually do with my big piece of paper and my cacao and wrote down all my options that I wanted to do. Will doesn't have, it might sound unfair or something, but Will doesn't really have too much of a say in the adventures. I mean, he does have a say, but he doesn't really. This is sort of my life and how I've wanted to do it. And I've had so many goals since before then. So he doesn't have a say, but Will is so easygoing and he's just happy to come along. So he doesn't really care what I do. And he's not very good at planning and things like that. So I sort of sit down, but that we discuss these things and say, well, what do you think about this and what do you think about that? So we had the piece of paper out. I'd written down these through hikes that I needed to finish. They were all scattered. I've got these leftover through hikes that are around that are really scattered. And I don't know what happened, but we actually bought a ticket to Alaska and a flight out of San Francisco that day when we were planning these through hikes. And we decided that we were going to ride our bikes from Alaska to San Francisco then. We didn't even have bikes or panniers or anything, and we just decided to do this bike trip all of a sudden. So 2025, Will and I rode from Alaska to San Francisco. We did 6,400 kilometers together. We spent 86 nights in the tent. This is my first time doing an adventure with somebody else. It was great, but it comes with its challenges. Sharing a tent for that long is challenging. Spending all day together is challenging. We survived, and it was really interesting for me because when you've been doing it for so long by yourself, you've got your set ways. And it was sometimes difficult when you've got somebody else there. Like, I don't have to think about when I want to eat or plan when I want to eat. I just go, oh, I need to eat now. But when you're with somebody else, Will would be like, oh, when do you think we're going to have lunch today? I'm like, I don't know when we're going to have lunch. I'm just going to have lunch when I want to have lunch. Oh, but I was thinking that maybe I should and I'm like, oh, so you don't think about these things, right? When you're by yourself, you just do it. Or when you're thinking about camping, you're like, well, I'm done. I'm going to camp now. And then when we're together, we have to like plan, like, where do you think you want to camp? And so there were just some of those little little challenges that we faced, but we navigated them pretty well together. We don't seem to have much confrontation. We're both kind of easygoing. Will's more accommodating to me. One of the funniest things that did happen, when I say that Will's not a planner, we were getting towards the end, on the Pacific coast route. Once you go through Oregon, the elevation starts to get pretty intense on there, compared to some of the flat riding that we did. And I said to Will, I'm just tired. I can't plan the next few days. Could you just do a little section? So we sort of planned our mileages out, really, not where we were exactly camping, but on the Oregon coast path. And when you get into California, there's all those hiker biker camps. So we were trying to get to those. So I got Will to plan this section out, and he planned 4 100-kilometer plus days in a row with elevation. We were not getting into a campsite until 8:30 at night. I was hungry and tired, and I was the grouchiest I had been on the whole trip. And I said to him, "Who plans 4 100-kilometer days in a row?" He goes, "Well, I just thought that would be okay because we were fit." Anyway, after that, I think he just wanted to get out of planning, Sarah. I don't think he wanted to plan anymore. So after that, we agreed that I would do all the planning from there. And yeah, and then I went back to Bali after that trip to do another recovery. I found that as I'm getting older, I need to put an emphasis on recovery, and I also now need to put a lot of effort into training before these adventures. Like just going out and doing them and coming home and just working and then going again, it's starting to take its toll on the body. So this year I've started going to the gym actually to prepare.
So you're training, you're doing recovery, you're going out on adventures. Future adventures, what's on this bucket list? What are the through hikes that are left that you want to do?
Well, I've actually booked 2026 in. I just booked it the other day.
Yeah, well, where are you off to?
It's pretty crazy. I'm gonna do the Southwest Coast Path and then do the GR10.
Amazing.
It's pretty epic, but yeah, that's what I've decided to do. So I'm gonna do them back to back with a break in the middle, a couple of days in the middle. Will unfortunately won't be joining me this year. He is, however, thinking about doing the GR10. So at this stage that I'm going off on my own, I'll definitely be walking the Southwest Coast Path by myself.
Honestly, it's a stunning trail. It's so beautiful. Like, I think you'll really, really enjoy it. And it'll be such good training for the GR10. I'm just trying to think what the elevation gain difference is. I feel as though there is a lot on the Southwest Coast Path, but it's different to the GR10.
Yeah, so Southwest Coast Path is 30,000 and the GR10 is 50,000 with basically it says every day you'll be climbing 1,000 meters.
Southwest Coast Path, perfect warm up. Perfect warm up for the GR10. When are you going to start that?
1st of June.
The June, July. Oh, perfect. Yeah, June, July, August, September. Lovely. That would be so nice. How are you feeling about it all? Are you at that stage now where because you've done so much traveling and so much adventuring that it's not really stepping outside your comfort zone anymore because it's like, I know I just need to figure out how to get to the start, how to get away at the end, and the rest will just sort itself out?
Yes and no. I still have those same feelings that I have from the first like from my first trip. I think to myself, "Oh, this is crazy. How am I going to do this? And can I do this? There's no way I'm going to finish this off. This is too ambitious." And then I have to check myself and go, "No, you just need to start and the rest will unfold." And you already know this now. So I think it's not just always about the physical well-being, but it's about the mental well-being too, and checking yourself for these things. So it is easier now. And so over the time, you perfect your kit. I'm chopping and changing a few bits out this time as well because you need to, and you want to make things a bit lighter. But getting to the start line is still always tricky for me mentally
Yeah.
because you don't really know what it's going to be like. And it's another 2,000-kilometer trip, but it's also a lot more elevation than the one I did last time.
Yeah. But you'd be training for it. You're training for it. You're going to the gym. You're doing your strength and conditioning. That'll all make a big difference to it.
I already noticed the training. So I've only been at the gym now for 2 weeks, and because I park run on a Saturday just for fun. And I ran this Saturday, and you just notice the difference. I didn't get sore in the legs until 4 kilometers, and I'm noticing that my legs are already getting stronger because I've been having some knee problems since sort of I came back from the cycling trip, and mostly since I've been running because I just run once or twice a week at maybe just 5Ks, just yeah, and I'd been having some knee problems. I was like, "Right, if you've got knee problems and you wanna do this much elevation, you need to do something about it." And so, yes, we started the gym. It's not heavy weightlifting, it's just some strength and conditioning, and I think it's gonna be really, really beneficial, as well as the yoga. And also I started on the creatine after you suggested that as well. And I've been on the creatine since I got back from Bali. And this is my first summer where I feel like I've got a lot more energy. Usually I'm exhausted when I'm working and trying to juggle training. And I feel amazing this summer.
That was honestly one of the biggest things for me. I've actually I've just finished editing my vlogs for the Southwest Coast Path, and I was taking creatine on the Southwest Coast Path vlogs, and I was actually only taking 2 grams. And after I'd done some more research, and I'd then like later like a year later, whatever, I'd upped it to 5 grams. But then I'd heard that the first 5 grams of creatine will go into your, by the way, I'm not a doctor for people listening, so make your own decisions when it comes to creatine. But basically, the first 5 grams of creatine will go into your muscles. And then any extra you take on that will go into your brain. So, especially if you're a woman in your 40s, getting up to like 10 grams of creatine can be absolutely amazing. And that's what I took on the GR10 along with like omega 3s. And those two supplements, honest to God, made such a big difference because my fatigue levels throughout the whole trip were like 2, 3 out of 10. Like I was not, and bearing in mind the elevation gain and loss, and I wouldn't say I was super, super fit before I started. But yeah, that's awesome. No, I think you're going to have such an incredible time out there. Like the Southwest Coast Path is actually it is one of the most incredible trails that I've ever walked, and so I'm always excited for other people to experience that as well. And then the mountains on the GR10, like the views that you'll get to see and the sights and the being in that mountain air is just incredible. And Chloe, do you share anything on social media? Are you on social media?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I have Facebook. I don't I don't really I when I'm on my adventures, I'm so like just I really like journaling. I do send out I started a few years ago, I would send some these voice journals out to some people who like to listen to them, friends and family. I posted some photos on Facebook last year for the first time in years because people wanted photos from our bike trip. But Will doesn't take photos at all. He hates taking photos. In fact, he actually hates taking photos of me. He gets really annoyed after a while when I'm like, "Could you just take a photo of me doing this?" So he's not into photos at all. I didn't really like it. I found a way to manage it. So I managed it well. I would write my Facebook post in my notes, collect the photos I wanted, and then just drop it at Wi-Fi when I got to it. But it's not my way. I'm so in the moment. I feel like I admire I admire you. I admire these women who do post, do make videos. I just find it so much there's so much to think about just when you're on the trail. Like, I had to stop writing my journal on the Wales Coast Path because just pre-planning the next days, thinking about where you were gonna get food, where you could get water, looking at the map, navigating the weather. By the time I did all of those things, if I had access to Wi-Fi, I was like, "When am I gonna have time to get on Facebook?"
Mm. But I really admire that as well because it's figuring out, what works for you and I suppose also what the purpose is of doing it. And I have these moments where I think I actually don't think I would post a huge amount on social media if it wasn't for me trying to get more people aware of the Tough Girl podcast through sharing my personal story. But it's definitely a balancing act though. And you know what? Good for you. Do what works for you. Do what brings you joy and happiness, and because there's no comparisons. The interesting thing is, like, when you were talking about, like, sort of doing the journaling, doing the planning each day, like, for me, I think that's why I have, like, a structure now, because it's just mentally you get so, or I certainly do, I get so tired, that I know I've only got a certain amount of mental capacity at the end of the day to do the planning for the following day, and also to write my notes up of what's happened, where I've been, what I've done. Because if I miss 1 or 2 days, I've got nothing. And what I mean by that is, one of the reasons I do take photos and videos is sometimes it all starts to blur for me, and I can't
Ah, yep.
really remember. Like someone would say, "Where were you yesterday?" I'm literally like, "No idea." I couldn't tell you. Like, you definitely have, like, like some of the highlights, or those really tough days when the weather's bad, or there's cows in the field, or something like that. This is an incredible, like, lifestyle that you are living. I just really love, like, how authentic that you're being to yourself. And Chloe, I'd love for you to share, like, your final words of advice for other women who maybe just want to live differently, like, I suppose, live life on their own terms. Apart from just do it, what words of advice would you like to share with the other women listening?
I've thought about this question a lot, Sarah, and I had to really sit with myself to think what would my message be. And I've come up with I sat I thought about this and I was like, so for me, it's that life life is pretty uncertain. I've had events happen in life that have proved this to me. So I think life's uncertain, and definitely our time here is uncertain. So I feel like we shouldn't put things off to the future or the right time or the right gear or anything. Just if there's something that you want to do, then just take the plunge. There's always going to be another job. There's always going to be another house. There's always going to be another boyfriend. I left a boyfriend when I'd left Perth the first time. Uh, there's always another one. So, and I think that we should just go with what we have now. And as I learned along the way, that the universe sort of conspires to keep you going if you trust yourself and have trust in your plan and keep that dream, like, in the front of your mind. The universe conspires to make this happen, and as you go along, you start to adapt and you grow and you learn, and things just start to get easier with these trips. I mean, I gave up everything in an impulsive moment, really, and I haven't regretted it for a second. And as I'd learnt to live with less over the years, suddenly money has become more abundant. When you don't want stuff and you don't want things and you don't want a big house and you don't want new shoes and you don't need new clothes, you suddenly just have all of this money, and I feel rich sometimes. And so from this, I created this lifestyle where now I work maybe for 6 to 7 months out of the year, and 1 month I work is specifically just to put money into an account for my future. So I'm still trying to think about the future. So I'm not just living in the moment with these adventures. I don't just work an adventure. I also think about my future and a retirement. So I do have money put away for that. And while I'm back here and I'm working, I we live off less than $100 a week, which people are going to listen to and think this is crazy. That's not possible, but it is possible. We grow some veggies. I grow some silver beets, some lettuces. We grow garlic. We grow tomato. They're very easy. They're very low maintenance. If you've got greens in your garden, you save a lot of money. We grow some herbs. You can even grow them in pots. And I every year I stop working. In Australia, we have this tax-free threshold. And if I stop working after I've earned $20,000, when I come back from my adventures, I get a $3,000 tax check. And so that helps me get started when I come back from my trips. When I've got no money again, I get the tax check. And so I just think that we shouldn't put things off, and just give it a crack. Get to the start line is my biggest thing, and that's what Will says to me now with this next one. Just get to the start line. Once you get to the start line and you take the first step, take the first pedal stroke, start that first day at the new job, you just keep going forward and the journey will unfold as you go. And that's just seemed to have worked well for me. Maybe I'm lucky, I don't know, but that's just how I see it, and just keep that dream at the front of your mind. Um, And one other thing I would like to note, if that's okay, is that I don't use technology. And I know there's a lot of people I've spoke to out there that think that they can't go on these walks because they don't know how to use an app or a GPS. And I'm not saying that like that what I'm doing is right, but I have only ever walked every single trail with a paper map or a guidebook. I've never turned my location on in Google. I don't know how to use Google Maps. I don't know how to follow that blue dot. I have always just done everything with a paper map. And all of these trails that I pick, I guess in a way, I wouldn't say they're easy, but they're easy to follow. Any Camino is relatively easy to follow. So don't put off doing a long distance hike out of fear of not being able to find your way, because I promise you that you will find your way. And occasionally there might not be a marker, and occasionally you take a left turn when you should have taken a right. But I find that when I'm out there and I've taken this left, I start walking, and I don't know if you relate to this, Sarah, but you kind of know that you're not on the track. There's something energetically, you just know you're like, this doesn't
Doesn't
seem.
feel right.
And so I just go back to where I was, or go back even sometimes further to the last marker and try to look for a sign or read the guidebook. And sometimes I've just had to sit there and wait for another human to come past.
Yeah.
And you get there, and our cycle trip in Alaska was exactly the same. We didn't have Google. We got into Alaska in Anchorage. We picked up a paper map, those tourist brochures, and we just started planning our way around like this. So don't think that you can't do something because you don't have an app or a phone to do it, because you don't really need it.
Chloe, thank you so much for sharing so much about your life story, your adventures, your challenges, your hikes, and all the top tips and advice as well. And I totally agree. Just get yourself to the start line. And Chloe, best of luck with the Southwest Coast Pass. Best of luck with the GR10. I think you're going to have such an amazing time. And I'm just excited we'll have to catch up in a couple of years to see what other adventures and challenges that you've been on.
Hopefully more cycling, Sarah. I don't think I could do any more through hikes. This year's pretty ambitious. The cycling was really easy.
Whatever you do, cycling or hiking is going to be epic.
No worries. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on the show, and thanks for being such an inspiration and kicking me along some of these times. Yeah, it's definitely been great to follow you all this time.
Hey, tribe. I really hope you enjoyed the episode with Chloe and it's inspired you to think about your next adventure and challenge. If you haven't watched the vlogs on the Tough Girl YouTube channel, please do go check it out. You can watch the vlogs from the GR10, the Southwest Coastal Path, the Wales Coastal Path, the GR20, and loads of other hikes and adventures that I've done. Just do want to say a massive shout out to Chloe for being such an absolute legend, for listening to the Tough Girl podcast, for supporting the work that I do, and being an amazing patron and supporter. I also just want to give two shout outs to two more new patrons, which is absolutely awesome. Jessica Charlotte Heaton. Jessica, thank you so much for signing up as a patron. I really do appreciate your support. And Nicole Haynes, thank you so much for signing up as a patron as well. I really, really do appreciate it. If you would like to support the work that I do and the mission to increase the amount of female role models in the media, especially in relation to adventure and physical challenges, then please do go and check out Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. All the information is there, super easy to sign up. You can sign up in multiple currencies: sterling, euro, US dollar, Singaporean dollar, New Zealand, Australia, euro, etc. It really does make a massive difference having your monthly support, having those funds coming in every month to pay for the running costs of putting out the Tough Girl podcast content. Thank you again for all your incredible support. All that's left for me to say is, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, give it your all, give it 110%, get after it, go for it, believe in yourself, because I believe in you. Take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.